they'll go from that to the other extreme. It takes a big push to reestablish those boundaries. The polar opposite, to the point that he was finding slights where there weren't any. Welcome to the Trans Boss podcast, home of the Trans Boss movement, the place where empowered trans people come to discover what it takes to become the best versions of themselves. I am your host, Jasmine Vine, a trans femme, trans empowerment specialist and the CEO of Javine, and I'm here to guide you on this empowering journey. In each episode, we'll dive deep into topics that matter to us trans people, like navigating through societal challenges, as well as building resilience and embracing an empowering mindset. We'll explore it all. We'll also bring on some incredible guests who are making a positive impact in the trans community. The Trans Boss podcast is your go-to resource for empowerment, hope, wisdom, and epic stories from empowered trans bosses across the globe. It's time to kick life's ass and create an empowered, authentic you. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. Hello, and welcome to this episode. Have you ever noticed how in life we always seem to shift from one extreme to another? This is something that I call the under to overcompensation switch, and I really want to break this down for you because when you understand how this works, it really helps put some things into perspective and helps you understand where you're at in life currently. Are you on the under or the overcompensation side of things? This cycle of overcompensation happens in many areas in life. We can see it. It's like a universal law. When it comes to pitch tracking, for example, how a note settles on a certain pitch. If you watch a pitch analyzer really closely, you'll find that if you go, it doesn't go directly to that pitch and that's where it stays. It actually finds the bounds of the pitch and then settles in the middle. But it does it really quickly, so we don't notice it. So we have, it's not, higher than this, it's not lower than this, it's somewhere in the middle, until it finds the middle. That's one example of how this overcompensation cycle happens. Staying on the voice train, this happens with voice a lot. I actually tell my vocal students to play up their voice more than they want to. I want them to go for a higher pitch than they want to be at and to go for, being more animated than they want to be, because they're finding the bounds of it. They're finding, by overcompensating and taking it further in that other direction, then we find the bounds and we settle somewhere in the middle. That's typically what happens. Whereas if we have, let's say I've got a really monotone voice, I don't really use much vocal variety, I've got a fair bit of weight coming through, whatever. And then I learn to change that a little bit and I start going like this. And now, instead of being on this end, I'm coming over here. And then what's going to happen is my voice is actually going to settle and it's going to go pretty much where it was before, because I haven't actually extended it very much. Whereas if I took it in like massively the other direction, we swing the pendulum all the way to the other side, and I start talking like I'm reading a children's book and I've got lots of animation in my voice, and then I let that settle, what you'll find is that you're going to still have more of those characteristics, but in more of a natural way. Makeup, same freaking thing. When someone is first transitioning, often we will start to wear a lot of makeup. I did this. I wore so much makeup every day when I went to school. It took me like 2 hours a day to put on my makeup, all contouring and highlighting and overdrawing the lips and doing so much to my face. And then over time, I started to settle in the middle. Before I was wearing no makeup. Then I started wearing a ton of makeup all the time. And then I started oscillating between those a little bit, right? I found the bounds of it. And now I'm at the point where I don't wear makeup hardly ever. I've gone to the other direction. And if I do wear makeup, oftentimes it'll take me like 5 minutes. I'll just fill in my eyebrows a little bit, put on like a tiny bit of lipstick and maybe some mascara. That's it. So you can see I've gone from one extreme to another and then I've settled in the middle. This is a few examples of how this happens. There's a particularly painful example of this I call it the dark side of trauma healing, because this under to overcompensation switch happens a lot with trauma survivors. People who have survived narcissistic abuse are notorious for this. People who have had their voices shut down, who haven't been allowed to express themselves, who have been repressed. This happens majorly. They are so repressed, they're not able to express themselves, they're not able to stand up for themselves, they're bullied all the time. And then once, like, something usually will click in that person, and they'll go from having no boundaries or really porous boundaries and letting people walk all over them, they'll go from that to the other extreme, where they almost become an aggressor in their life. They become someone who is really pushy. They have really, really firm, strong boundaries to the point that they don't care about anybody else. And you'll often hear things like, I've put up with this shit before and I'm not going to put up with it from you. There's an anger to it. There's a certain charge to it, because they've gone from super repressed and not being able to stand up for themselves to the point where they're like, ain't no one gonna walk all over me ever again. And I've seen it with my cousin most recently, actually. He was brought up by my nan, who was very much a narcissistic person, and she exhibited a lot of narcissistic abuse. He hadn't dealt with those things. He never stood up for himself. He never, held boundaries. It was always, I've just got to jump when she says jump. And so he didn't develop a really secure sense of self with that. Hello, lovely. If you like what you're hearing so far, and I hope you do, then you are going to love the free trainings that I have. So these trainings have helped hundreds of my own clients and my followers get into a place of empowerment, loving their authentic selves with more hope, comfort, confidence, and safety. And that is really what we're all about here. So if you're listening to this podcast, there's something for you, trans or not, whether you're interested in trauma healing or, learning to live a more empowered life, in control life, or if you're just sick of your voice getting you misgendered, then these trainings break down my core methodologies to help you with all of that and more. And it's the methodologies that I use with all of my clients. So you can register for that via the link in the description box below, and I will see you there. Mwah! Now let's get back into the episode. When he got into therapy, he started, seeing a therapist, and he started making some good leaps and bounds there. At a certain point, that awareness came in and the overcompensation switch happened. He went from never standing up for himself to, always having his voice shut down and doing everything that everyone else says that he should be doing, to the polar opposite, to the point that he was finding slights where there weren't any. He was finding things to be angry about with people and finding issues where there weren't actually issues. But the reason was because he'd gotten so much awareness around this, and that switch had happened, and now he wants to stand up for himself, and now he wants to advocate for his needs and all of that. And he actually created things or saw things that weren't actually happening as an opportunity for him to stand up for himself and to advocate for himself. It was really interesting to see. It was a little bit disheartening as it was happening, because I could see what was happening, but you can't tell someone that. Like, that's something that people have to come to the understanding themselves. And so I just weathered that storm a little bit. I knew that he was probably going to be a little bit more touchy than usual. I'd have to choose my words more carefully. We couldn't have our banter, sort of joking relationship that we used to have, because he was taking offense to things that he wouldn't have taken offense to before. And in a lot of ways, that was a really great shift, because it allowed us to re-establish a different baseline for our connection, which was really awesome in a lot of ways. However, it also highlighted that there were a lot of things that were actually normal and okay, but were being viewed in a different way because of that switch, because of that desire to stand up for himself. So that is really one of the dark sides to healings. It's happened, many times that I can think of, and I'm sure you can relate. Perhaps you've seen this either in yourself or someone that you're close to, where you see that switch happen. And you see them go too far into the other direction to the point that they become an aggressor and they become too, intense with that side of things. And then after a while, they settle back down, they settle into a neutral. This is the process of creating new boundaries. Oftentimes, when our boundaries have been crossed so often and so consistently, it takes a big push to reestablish those boundaries. That's why some people will, the silent treatment is like, a big thing. Someone will have a boundary that's crossed a bunch of times and they gently try to reestablish those boundaries and the person doesn't allow them to do that. And so then they switch and they establish really firm boundaries and they go, no, I'm going to move out of this house if you don't, blah, blah, blah. And they, really stand up for themselves. And then it allows them to reestablish those boundaries in a better place and then settle. So this cycle happens all the time, and you'll probably start noticing it now that we've spoken about it. I like to imagine it like a pendulum. If you have a pendulum in front of you, you see it swinging from, one side to the other. This is always happening in our lives. Often I'll think of it like duality. So when we have, the duality of the good or the bad, or the things that feel nice or horrible, the hate, the love, all these opposites, the duality. We can't have one without the other. The pendulum is going to swing regardless. It's going to go to one or the other. You can't experience all the positive without the negative. You're going to experience both of those things. And it's a really good mindset shift to just ask yourself, where am I on the pendulum at the moment? When we ask ourselves, where are we on the pendulum at the moment? It allows us to put it into perspective, to go, okay, I'm feeling really crappy right now. Things are not going my way. It's, everything's really freaking difficult. Where am I on the pendulum right now? Oh, I'm swung way up this side. If I remember, a couple of months ago, I was on the other side. Everything was going great. Everything was just moving along. There was no problems. Now I'm on the other side. This is a cycle that we go through all the time. We have the extreme on the one end and then it comes down. And then when we're in the middle here, it's kind of like we're stable. We're stable. Everything's just normal. It's whatever. And then it starts going up the other direction. We're like, oh, all of these things are happening. And then it settles and then it comes back. And this cycle happens constantly. We're constantly reestablishing and reaffirming certain boundaries, releasing boundaries, bringing new boundaries in. And that cycle is happening throughout it all. Remember to ask yourself that question. Remember that we always swing from undercompensation to overcompensation. The pendulum of life is always swinging. So ask yourself, where on the pendulum am I right now? And remember, it's going to move. It's going to swing. It's going to keep swinging. That's really the mindset shift that I want you to have, is to understand that life goes on. It's going to keep swinging. And when you recognize where you are on that cycle, it'll help you to be more grateful and more present with the moment. So that is all from me for this one. And remember, you are loved and you have the ability to create a happier, more empowered version of you. So go out there and do it. Until next time, thank you for watching and bye-bye. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Transboss podcast. If you support the Transboss movement, it would help immensely if you could leave a review on your favorite podcasting app, follow us, and share your biggest takeaway from this episode on social media. Don't forget to tag me at jasmine.vine on Instagram because I would love to see it. Now get out there, do the things, and take the next step into that empowered life you deserve. See you next time.